Welcome to the first Infosec Recruitment and Hiring podcast hosted by PeerTalk. I'm Rosie Anderson from the UK. We've got a truly global panel, including Chris Bride from Los Angeles and Tyson from San Francisco, who's a hiring manager. So very much like to thank you for both attending. Unfortunately, Thomas isn't available. He has recently had a baby, so we're assuming that sleepless nights are causing him a few problems at the moment. So unfortunately, he's not available to join us at the moment. But I'd like to I'd like to let both Tyson and Chris introduce themselves. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Chris Rides. I'm CEO or Chief Everything Officer, as I'd like to call it, for Tyro Security. We're an information security recruiting and professional services company based out of Los Angeles. We've been running for around 5 years, and my personal background is on the recruiting side rather than the technical side. It's my business partner that's the technical one. And I've been working in recruitment for 17 years now. Started off in the UK, hence the accent, and been over in the States for 8 years. Over to you, Tyson.
Hi, my name is Tyson. I'm the VP of Security at Opportune. We're a financial services company that is based out of Redwood City in California. I'm, as alluded to, I'm the hiring manager on the call. And in relation to me constantly needing additional resources or building out the teams and functionalities within my security program, I obviously need to work fairly closely with recruiters in the industry to find the talent that I need at the time.
Okay, well, how I wanted to run this was to have two recruiters talking about how they tend to run a vacancy, and then for Tyson, if you can ask any questions and talk through how you like to work with agencies and the process that you follow. Unfortunately, if Thomas isn't available, I'm going to take the other place. But Chris, I don't know if you want to run through first. Do you have a certain type of role that you recruit for every time? Would you recruit for information security as a whole?
Yeah, we're really information security and audit related to information security are the areas that we focus on. We do a lot of technical recruiting, so very typical for us to see sort of information security engineers, analysts, and application security engineering people. They're the kind of vacancies we tend to get. And we have a process that we run through, which I know you were asking about processes, so maybe if I kind of run through the process that we tend to follow, just in a big overview of it. Generally, when we first get a role from a client, usually the first thing we do is to make sure that we've got a full understanding of the actual job description from the hiring manager, ideally. And sometimes that's a matter of working closely with human resources or an internal recruiting department to arrange that call. Without that call, we generally struggle to make that role a priority, and reasons behind that are probably 90% at least of the positions that we get in writing as a job spec. When we then speak to the manager and run through what they're looking for, there's quite a big difference. And so typically we'll have those phone calls first of all. We'll of course make sure we've got an understanding of who the company are, what are the selling benefits around working for that company. Try to get a good understanding of salary or rate ranges, depending if it's contract or permanent. If they're looking at the location it specifically needs to be based in, will they cover relocation? Information security markets highly in demand for great individuals, and so often we have to look at relocating individuals for that. And then for the US, and I imagine back when I was in the UK it was similar. Are we looking at people that have visas, or people that will be able to be sponsored for a visa, or do they will they accept green cards? Is there anything around that? A US citizen perhaps if the role is security cleared. So we try to understand that. The recruitment process is really important, so we can manage the candidate's expectations on how long the process will take and the different steps, and get an idea of what's driving the need for the vacancy. So that's kind of the information gathering stage. The step after that is to start using that to reach out, whether that's advertising on our site or on various other sites that are available out there, using our network. We're personally really heavily involved in the not only Los Angeles but the security community as a whole. So we go to all of the security conferences. I've spoken at a number of the big ones here in the US. My business partner actually is out speaking at IoT World this week on the security of IoT devices. He's the technical part of our partnership. So we have a good network through doing those sort of things. I founded the Cloud Security Alliance here, so here in LA. So I've been very involved with the local communities for that. And we use that network to try and find individuals that typically are more passive, that aren't advertising, that aren't looking at adverts, and then try and give those people across once they've been fully qualified to the client, and then manage all of the expectations and process from there, hopefully to an offer. So that's kind of an overview of the steps we go through.
Okay, over in the UK, I'm sure we probably work quite similarly, to be honest. I mean, I manage outsourced cyber recruitment team, and we kind of structure ourselves. So we have 5 disciplines that we recruit in. So for me, I started out recruiting purely for pen testers to really try and get an understanding of that as a market, understand the candidate community, understand the salaries, the availability of the talent in the UK, sort of all across the UK, both contract and perm. One of my colleagues covers information assurance. Somebody else covers security architecture. I've now started to look more at the senior appointments, the sort of threat and vulnerability managers, the CISOs, and that enables us when we pick up a vacancy. So we're a specialist division as part of a larger IT recruiter. So if it is a more generalist IT role, it would fit somewhere else. If it was specialist cyber and fit into our 4 or 5 areas, because we also cover SOC analysts as well, then it would fall to us to kind of work that role, whether it's a new customer that we're dealing with, or whether it's a preferred supplier customer like a big bank that the business recruits for as a whole. So exactly the same, I like to speak to the person who's got the need, who's got the pain, who's recruited for the role, just to fully understand what they want. A job spec is 2-dimensional. Like you said, 90% of the time, stuff that's on there isn't correct, isn't right. Not every organisation wants to put what SIEM tool they're working with and all the technologies that they're working with out into the open marketplace. If by speaking to the manager, you can properly understand what they want. And we try and be consultative. So because we work in our own verticals, we can say, your salary is a little bit out. If you want somebody at that salary, you might have to lower the expectations and look at somebody who's ready to go through a qualification. Or we can say, actually, your salary is really good. Sometimes we get that. That will help us to find you maybe a more senior candidate than what you necessarily wanted. But by being consultative and pushing back to the customer and saying, okay, there's 50 pen testers in my network at the moment who are active. I can tell you now, if you want someone security cleared, for example, you might only have 3 available. If you want somebody in London, I've got 8 available. If you want a check team leader, I've only got 4 available in your location. That allows us to be a lot more consultative and kind of manage the customer's expectations as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's one of the benefits for working with a company or division that specialises in one particular area. It's that consulting ability and the ability to I know when companies come to us with a requirement. And we've got a team here, so it's split differently within each team member. But when they come to us with a requirement, a majority of the time, once we've already got the highlights, we already know why they're struggling to fill that position.
Yeah.
And I think that is that approach you talk about being in one particular area. It'd be great to hear, I guess, sorry, I'm probably stepping on your shoes a bit here, Rosie, but I'd love to hear from Tyson
You're very
in terms
welcome.
of where they see, the process from their end, and then also, listening to what we've talked about, where they maybe see gaps, because, we'd love to do a better job, right?
Yeah, definitely. Tyson, over to you.
Sure. So largely, as you just kind of described the consulting aspect of and the general high-level process of what each of you go through, it's pretty much been my experience, and that's generally how we work with recruiters. I think what I have found, which kind of helps the process that much more, is I like to try and improve the dynamics across three different areas. One is in relation to how we construct the job profile. There's two things that we key on. One is building in kind of a amount of flexibility on the roles and responsibilities, so it's a little bit wider versus something that's very narrow. Because just given that there's a gap of skills out there, it's better to look for someone that has a little bit wider breadth of skills versus someone that's very specific or very siloed. The other aspect of it is we really try to focus on reasonability. I've seen it a number of times where folks are looking for a junior position, but they're demanding 8 years of experience with 10 different certifications, which it doesn't make any sense, and you're just not going to be able to find anyone. Which not only is not it's not going to be successful for the person that's hiring. It's not going to be a successful engagement with the recruiting firm as well. The other two dynamics that we also kind of look at is cultural fit within the company itself. So it's not just a matter of finding someone that is going to meet the skill set that you're looking for. It's making sure that they're going to be successful within the team that they're actually working in. Now, obviously, that is kind of hard to do from a pre-screening, but you can kind of ahead of time, based on their profile, based on the things that they've been working on, get some initial insight into whether or not they're culturally going to fit into the environment that they're going to be working in. And of course, as you go through the interview process, you further flesh that out. And then the third dynamic that we tend to try and also overlay on the process is a person's malleability. And when I say malleability, it's their ability to flex up or flex down or flex across various things. Because in reality, what we have found is the folks that are able to kind of grow over time, learn new skills, take on new roles and responsibilities, end up being just that much more successful when we bring them on board. So again, it goes back to that perspective of constructing the job so that it's a little bit wider versus something that's very narrow in hindsight.
Okay, that sounds that sounds perfect to me. How do you work with recruiters at the moment? What do you find works really well, and what's your biggest bugbear?
So what works really well is, again, that consultative nature, where we sit down and we talk about those three dynamics and really work together through the process to narrow down and zero in on the folks that we actually want to talk to. So, for example, when I work with a recruiter, we'll start profiling people together on LinkedIn. Like, here's generally who someone I might be looking for. Here's generally who someone I might be working for. And from there, the recruiter is able to really understand what it is that we're looking for, and then can construct a list of folks that they think that we should probably be talking to, which we then go through and go, yes, this is who we're looking for, or here's another individual. And then we can work through the interview process from that. What doesn't work well is when that consultative interaction doesn't take place. So, for example, if I just get a long list of people that are not really relative to what it is I'm looking for, or I have to necessarily weed through and kind of find the needle in the haystack, it's not going to be a successful engagement, not only for myself looking for the resources, but also the people on the other hand who end up getting bombarded from the recruiter saying, oh, are you interested in this position? Are you interested in this position? Because it's not necessarily something that is going to be really relative or engaging for them to actually think about. And in addition, on the flip side, when we also talk to the recruiters, there's also another element is we help them construct that actual initial engagement and the further on conversation with the person that they want to talk to, so that they know how to actually sell the position as well. Because it's one thing for us to be interested in someone, they've also got to be interested in us. So that's another, I guess, aspect of that dynamic to ensure success.
I think that's a very valid point. I think definitely in a skills shortage, and we'll come on to that from the questions from the community shortly, I think organisations do need to be aware that it is a two-way process. There are candidates that are definitely in demand that are looking at multiple roles, and you're very right to invest that time working with the right recruiters who are going to do a really good job of selling you and your business and your role, but also understand your values and your culture and how to sell that properly into the marketplace. Chris, do you want to respond to that? Would you agree with that point?
I'd completely agree, and it's really good to hear that coming from, hearing your process and coming from a hiring manager about the importance of having that consultative approach and widening, what you're actually looking for. I know we've got a few other questions from specific people, and I'm sure that will come up as some of the answers, because it's good to hear that you're doing that, and I'd love to find more hiring managers that will work in the same way, because it isn't always that common, unfortunately. Don't know whether it's the same in the UK, but here over in the US, that's the case anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree. On the subject of shortage of candidates, there's a few peer listers that have asked about, is there really a shortage of skilled candidates within Infosec, and why won't organisations train candidates? So, what you recruit for, Chris, do you find, is it hard to find the right talent for vacancies?
Yeah, it definitely is, and I think there's a couple of reasons behind that. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, there's a shortage of perfectly skilled unicorns in our industry, right? There's no doubt of that, and unfortunately, many of the requirements we get are looking for exactly that. They're looking for people that do exist out there, but there's probably 3 or 4 of them, and they're happy working where they are, and they don't live anywhere near where the role's located. So it's having that consultative approach to getting people to widen up what they're looking for, to actually look at areas where there are going to be more candidates. And I still don't mean, when we do this with managers, I'm not talking about suddenly opening up a pool of candidates where, I can turn around and say, right, yeah, we'll have 5 resumes across to you that fit that perfectly tomorrow, because that's not the marketplace that security is working in. So, I believe that there is certainly a shortage. I do also think there's a lot of unrealistic expectations out there around the mix of skill sets that people want, and also about how much time companies will put into maybe training or taking somebody. I think often it's a mixture, because it's a very well-paid industry, and many companies look at information security, as part of the IT department, and so when they start looking at the very high salaries they need to pay somebody, they want to actually train somebody and pay those salaries. It doesn't
there's got to be some
compute.
flex both ways.
Yeah, exactly. So they're looking and saying, right, we're paying a lot more than we are for a general IT person, and you're telling me that we have to actually also take somebody with slightly less skills in information security, or have to train them in a certain area. It's hard to get companies to understand that that's the marketplace we're in. So that's a tough one to deal with. The other thing is just looking at the drive for the company. We have roles that people that come up to us that have been looking for 6 months, and you ask them about how the effect's been on their company, and to not have that person, and they're like, well, we've spread the load amongst the current team, And what you don't see with doing things like that is that, you've got people doing overtime that are often not paid overtime. So that the hidden costs and stuff like that, you end up losing more staff and needing more staff because people move on and go somewhere else where they don't get as overworked. So it's tough. I think companies, if more companies sort of realised that this was what was needed, and actually I think a lot of senior information security directors, CISOs, they realise that, but it's not always that easy to explain that to boards to get the money, to hire the right people, or to provide the kind of training that will keep people locked in for a while. So I do think that there is a gap there, and I certainly think there is a shortage of candidates.
A question on Tyson. If you were recruiting for somebody who wanted to break in, or if you wanted to advise somebody who wanted to break into security, who maybe had general IT experience, what certificates or what certifications do you think are most important, or what do you feel are the most in demand? And that's another question that's come through from the community.
Was that for me or for Tyson? It broke up a little bit there.
Tyson, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So that's a kind of a complex question. Because I view someone as trying to break into the industry with actually, there's many different avenues that they could do that. And it's not just a matter of going out and getting a certificate, per se. A certificate, I think, helps open doors in that, going back to unrealistic expectations, folks like listing certificates a lot within the job descriptions that they're looking for. And certificates provide kind of a good bellwether for someone's knowledge in a particular area. And it's also a way for people to acquire those skills. But for someone that's just literally starting out, going and getting a certificate can be, in my opinion, maybe not a cost-effective manner by which to achieve that. I think what would be more important is for folks on their own to go and train themselves using resources that are freely out on the internet, and start gaining experience that way, and also participating in community-like forums like PeerList and some of the other stuff, to develop that rapport within the community that kind of gives them kind of a track record that's visually available, which then from my perspective, you can put that as part of your resume, like, hey, I'm doing this in the community, here are the things that I've been doing, that then becomes interesting to hiring managers versus just looking at certificates. So, like I said, if someone was purely starting out from the ground level, I think it's, seeking out things that are, kind of freely available, seeking out communities that are going to foster and kind of take you in and help you kind of learn over time is probably the more proven method by which doing that. At least that is my opinion on that particular topic.
In the US, do you have capture the flag competitions and hackathons like they do in the UK, sort of sponsored events that organisations do? Yeah,
absolutely. There are those events. We haven't necessarily sponsored one ourselves, but there are those events that go on from time to time. Capture the flag. In fact, community colleges sometimes participate in those. So you can go take some courses at a community college and then get into one of those events. And again, that becomes part of the experience that you can kind of attach to your resume and such that, a new person that is entering the industry can say, this is what I've been working on. Here are the things I've been doing. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good. That's a great point, Rosie, on the capture the flags. Like most of the conferences, the big conferences, have the ability for students to go in and get sort of discounted access. Often, if you're involved in the community, there'll be giveaways for entrance to these sort of things, and most of them have sort of capture the flags, and you can just go and practice your skills in. I'm on the advisory board of Cyberwatch West, which is a sort of National Science Foundation funded state colleges out here, and they have capture the flags. And I've also worked with on the advisory board of one of the universities here for a similar thing, and certainly they have a lot of that capture the flags and a lot of competitions and places you can sort of get involved in actually training yourself. And there's so much free sort of video and stuff out there when you start looking. So I think Tyson's got a great point in where you can train yourself up and what you can do to actually get hands-on things that you can put on your resume.
Perfect. Another question from the community then. So to both of you really, the contractors that are looking to make the jump to permanent opportunities, or seasoned contractors that might have a gap in employment history, what advice would you give to a contractor making the move to jump into perm, or a candidate returning from a career break to help them break back into work?
It's a good and common thing to happen. So I feel that they're kind of similar things in terms of what you would do. Anybody with breaks, I think it's really important that you're able to explain what you were doing during that piece. Don't lie, don't avoid the question. Make sure you're able to explain that. And if you can explain it on your resume briefly, then it's worthwhile doing so. Because I always feel that if your resume is often your tool to get you the interview, and the less doubts or possibly negative questions that people might have in their head when they're reading that, the better. So I think certainly be prepared to explain it, and if you can do so briefly on your resume, do it on there. Make sure that you have stayed as hands-on as you can if that was possible during that break. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to keep hands-on, including the sort of going online and going and using these capture the flags. If you're a long-term contractor, I just think you need to have a very good reason as to why you're now moving to permanent, because there's always going to be those doubts that, when somebody goes from contracting into permanent, it's such a change for them, and they're used to working maybe a slightly different manner as a contractor, that they're not going to enjoy it, and they're going to want to go back to contracting. So you need to have a good reason as to why you're making that move, to make sure everybody's comfortable that it is something you want to do for the long term, and you're not just filling a gap until you can go back contracting. And really good references. There's pros and cons for being a contractor. Sell your positives. You're going to have had experience in a lot of different environments with potentially a lot of different skills, and you'd have had to get to grip very quick with new projects and people, and be able to make bonds very quickly as a contractor. So there's a lot of pros that contractors can bring to roles, and if you've been a great contractor, you should be able to have plenty of references for people that will tell you that for each of the roles, and be able to show perhaps where you've been extended when you were initially taken on. So those are the kind of things I would always recommend both contractors and people with a career break, and then connect back into the industry. Look at the ISSA or OWASP or the Cloud Security Alliance or ISC Squared. Get to those meetings. They're free to go to, and it's a great way to build your network and have people that are willing to go to bat for you, that are known maybe in the local community. That's
great advice. That's something I definitely agree with. Using your network, using who you know, using where you've worked before if you're trying to jump back from a career break. You are right, and the references as well. Tyson, what's your view? Do you have concerns if a contractor's CV is presented to you for a permanent role? What would your normal thought process be?
No, not necessarily. I think to Chris's point, it kind of depends on how someone structures their story. And it's not just the story in, I ask you the question and it's like, why are you getting back into industry and a permanent position? It also starts with just how they construct their resume. What are the things that they've been doing if there's a gap? Have they been going to these meetings or these events? Are they participating in community? So again, it really goes back to kind of how they construct that picture of themselves, not only in person, again, when I'm having a dialogue, but also that first bit of information that I see, which is typically their resume or their LinkedIn profile or other bits of information that might be out there on the internet about them. So again, I think it goes back to how they construct their story.
Okay, another question from the community is on interview situations. So this is one for you, Tyson. The community feel like they never really know how to respond to the question, what's your biggest strength and what's your biggest weakness? Can you give some examples of good answers that you've heard from that in an interview scenario, or any advice to candidates who are coming into an interview and get asked that?
So I think in reality, the best answers are the ones that are truthful and really coming from a candidate's experience. There can be canned answers on, this is my biggest strength or this is my biggest weakness. But in reality, that if you're dealing with a good interviewer, they're going to kind of pick up on those canned things, and they're going to actually also pick up on something that is truthful and coming from the heart. So if an interviewer thinks that they're going to get those types of questions, so for example, I often like to ask what's someone's favorite book, because sometimes that gives me insight into their problem-solving skills and things that they're interested in, not just necessarily information security related. Before you go into interview, you should probably think through some of those types of questions and how you would answer it, meaning things, and again from a truthful standpoint, would be probably the best approach that someone can take if they get those types of questions.
How do you like to run your interviews? Do you do technical tests with candidates? Is it question and answer? Do you get them to run through a problem and approach how they're thinking? Or I'm sure it's different for every role, but do you have a normal structure?
Yeah, it's constructed a little bit different based on the role. But as I kind of alluded to, obviously we want to make sure that they're going to be a skills fit for the role. So we do ask, obviously, some technical questions, but we typically do it in a scenario format and ask them to try and solve a problem versus what's the command or whatever that you need to run to do this. Because it's more important that folks understand how to solve a problem versus a particular detail that you can, let's say, Google or something like that, right? And then the other two elements that we look at is culture fit, and then malleability, right? The ability for the candidate to be flexible in the position that we're putting them in. So that's generally how we structure an interview, and the three things that we're generally looking for in an interview.
Perfect. I think we're pretty much done on questions. There is one other which I'm going to address from the UK stance, which I'd like to ask both of you as well, your point of view. In the HR profession and with recruiters, there are more and more recruiters coming into the industry, jumping onto the sexy cybersecurity bandwagon. A lovely quote there. What do you think, or are you aware of any initiatives to really professionalise that industry? I know there's one in the UK, which I'm going to mention, which is something called CERIS, which is the Confederation of Ethical Recruiters in Information Security, which is something that's been brought up with CREST. Recruiters have worked with CREST to put in place a standard and a professional code of conduct for recruiters in the UK, which to be on that list, which is something we're going through at the moment, you have to have references from both clients and from candidates of you personally as a recruiter having placed in those roles and sign up to continuous professional development with a small membership fee over the year. So that's something that's been put in place in the UK to try and professionalise and standardise information security recruitment. Have you guys got anything similar in the US that you're aware of, that you're maybe a member of, or that you know is an initiative within the community to try and professionalise those recruiters?
I'm not aware of anything over here in the US. I've been contacted by a few sort of, ranking the information security recruiters in the US and stuff like that. And when I've done some digging, like, okay, how do we get ranked? What questions do you ask us? And unfortunately, the response is often, we have number 3 spot available at $7,000. So,
that's not the right way to do it.
No, I don't like. It doesn't feel that good. I saw a competitor advertising or mailing out how they'd just been ranked in the same thing at number 7, and I was like, oh my goodness, this isn't how it should be done. And so that's the only thing I've really seen over here. So I can't say for sure that there's anything sort of specifically going, focusing on that. I know that there is a difference, and often people get mixed up between human resources and recruitment, and there is a difference. Recruitment is often sort of part of a human resources person's role, or often a completely separate position within a human resources department. So it's not always the same thing. I can't talk much other than I've worked previously for other recruitment companies, and having now had my own and trained multiple staff up here, I definitely think there's a difference in the way you go about doing it. But I think that's a personal thing. Who's your mentor? Who drives it that way? How do you make sure they've got experience? For us, it's been very involved in the community. Spending our evenings going to events and mixing with technical people to have a good understanding of the technical areas. We're slightly different as a company because my business partner's a pen tester and a security specialist. So we've had, I've got technical people in house. We have a professional services arm to our business. So I have pen testers. I've got 2 virtual CISOs that go out and do policy work. So we have access to that. Yeah. So it's a little bit different, but I don't know of any sort of any departments that are, or any sort of things that are happening much like the UK. I do think actually the UK, and I might be a bit biased because I come from there, but I do think that the UK often leads the way with a lot of this sort of stuff, and I've certainly seen more professionalism in recruiting, with UK recruiters coming over and get involved with US ones. So
okay. Well, that's positive for me anyway. I'm going to wrap it up there because we're almost at the end of time. I'm sure that we've had some interesting points. I hope the community are really interested in what we're doing, and I hope we can roll this out as a series of different podcasts. So I would like to thank both Tyson and Chris. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you for getting involved. And I'd like to throw out to the community, if you like what you've heard today, if you have any burning questions, I'm sure all 3 of us will be happy to come back and answer any questions in the comments of the podcast. But also if there is anything that the community wants us to talk about in future podcasts, I'm sure, I know I'd like to be involved again if both of yourselves would be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rosie, and thanks for getting involved and taking this by the horns.
That's me. That's what I like to do.
Same here. Thank you, Rosie.